Mandatory minicamp officially begins tomorrow. Shedeur Sanders gets his jersey along with Jerry Verse. He's rocking that number 8. We also have Brendan Sorsby cleared to play for the 2026 season. Of course, they are going to try to say that what the Browns want, but we have the receipts to prove them wrong.
The Cleveland Browns didn't just hand Shedeur Sanders a jersey this week. They handed him a message, number 8. And if you think that number doesn't mean anything, you haven't been paying attention to what this franchise has been quietly doing all offseason. Here's what's strange. The same week they cleared Brendan Sorsby and gave him his shot at relevance, the same week the media started loudly pushing for a backup who hasn't played a single professional snap, this organization walked out to that practice field and handed the future a number. Not Sorsby, not Watson, Shedeur. And the number was 8.
So once again, as I said before, mandatory minicamp is officially here. Tomorrow, the Cleveland Browns will host their 3-day mandatory minicamp ahead of NFL training camp, and then the actual season begins. Can you guys actually believe we're that close to football season?
I'm finna pull up on somebody, man. Where should I pull up to? Y'all type below, man. Where should I pull up?
The number worn by some of the most consequential quarterbacks in NFL history. That's not by accident. Organizations don't make accidents that cost them money. By the end of this video, you're going to see something that most Browns fans, most NFL fans, completely glossed over this week. A signal buried inside the noise of minicamp coverage, hidden in plain sight. And once you see it, you'll understand that the quarterback competition in Cleveland might already be over. They just haven't announced it yet. Let me take you back to a specific moment, not a season, not a stretch of games, one moment. It's 2024. Deshaun Watson takes another snap for the Cleveland Browns. The crowd, a crowd that spent years waiting, that endured the contract, the suspension, the controversy, goes quiet. Not because something dramatic happened, because nothing dramatic happened, because it all looked exactly like what everyone quietly feared it was.
Yeah, it would, but and I've talked about this a lot on my show, on other shows, that it's been consistently inconsistent. You go back and listen to what Todd Monken had to say last week when he was talking about, hey, my opinion changes by the day, and I think that's just because one day Deshaun has the good day, the next day it's Shedeur that has the good day, and then back to Deshaun, back to Shedeur. Maybe they put back-to-back days together, but then you're going back and forth. I just think that's a byproduct of the inconsistency. And look, we're only out there for one of the 3 practices. Now this week
A franchise at a crossroads. A $230 million question mark under center in a city that has learned over decades to protect itself from hope. That's the wound. Not the injury, not the contract, the quiet, the exhausted, familiar quiet of a fan base that has been here before. And into that silence, a rookie walks onto the practice field in the spring of 2026, the son of a legend, the face of a Colorado story that captivated a nation, a young man who spent last season throwing to ball boys while the organization figured out what it actually had. That wound is still open. And everything that happens this minicamp, every rep, every decision, every jersey handed out, is either salt in it or the first real step toward healing it. Watch the reps, not the stats, not the quotes, the reps.
From either one of these guys. Now, he can stand up there and say he's got 2 starting caliber quarterbacks in the NFL. I'm going to disagree with him, because I think if you say you got 2, you got none. Yes, you have 2 guys who have started games in the National Football League, but right now, they're just wildly inconsistent when you're talking about this time of year where there's very minimal defensive pressure. You're not really under siege. You're not going to be hit, whatever. You're doing some installs and things like that, but this is supposed to be the easy time of the year, right? I mean, for a quarterback, this is the fun.
During OTAs, the media got access to 1 of 3 practices each week. 1. So every time a beat reporter said, Shedeur looked sharp today, or Watson had a rough session, they were describing 1/3 of the picture, 1 slice. And Todd Monken himself said it out loud. His opinion changes day to day. One day Deshaun has it. The next day, Shedeur. That's not indecision. That's a coach watching something very specific. Who responds to pressure? Who bounces back? Who shows up in the 3rd practice nobody covered? Todd Monken said he has 2 starting caliber quarterbacks. Sounds like a compliment. It isn't.
They can go ahead and stop the Brendan Sorsby talks right now. Todd Monken made it very clear that he does not want Brendan Sorsby. In fact, he don't even think an NFL team could possibly want Brendan Sorsby. So they can go ahead and stop that right now. And you guys know me, I'm going to stop them right in their tracks right now.
I mean, it's not even come across my desk. I don't think we're in a position to want to go down that road. That's my opinion. That's not Andrew's. And that I like the quarterbacks that we have.
When a head coach says, "I've got 2 starters in the spring of a season," that is not confidence. That is negotiation. That is a man managing 2 very different egos, one veteran, one ascending, while he quietly does his math on the inside. Because if you truly believed you had your guy, you'd say it, quietly, in the right moment. You wouldn't make it a tie. Shedeur Sanders gets jersey number 8 on day 1 of mandatory minicamp. Jared Verse, the defensive standout, a genuine building block, gets his number the same day. The organization puts them together, photographs them, pushes it out. They didn't do that with Brendan Sorsby. They didn't do that with Watson. They did it with the 2 men they see as the face of 2026 and beyond. And here's where the data lands. Deshaun Watson, physically healthy by all accounts, shaking off rust, flashing moments of the quarterback Cleveland paid for, has also, in those same OTA sessions, shown the version of himself that lost this city in the first place. The hesitation, the checkdowns, the moments where you catch yourself thinking, that's not the 2020 version. That's not an accusation. That's a pattern, and patterns don't lie. When was the last time you saw an NFL franchise hand a number to a backup on day 1 of mandatory minicamp with a camera pointed at him? Let's talk about what's actually happening in that quarterback room, because this isn't just a football competition. This is a study in identity under pressure. Deshaun Watson's entire self-concept, the elite franchise quarterback, the man worth $230 million, is tied to a role he has never fully reclaimed since his return from suspension. Every day that Shedeur Sanders gets a meaningful rep, Watson's brain is doing something very specific. It's measuring, comparing, calibrating how close the threat is. And when that happens, the body responds before the mind can override it. You see it in the footwork, in the decision windows, in the moments where a healthy quarterback should be decisive and isn't. Now watch Shedeur against that same framework. He's physically elevated this offseason. He's getting real reps against real starters, the Denzel Wards, the Carson Schweitzers of this team. Last year, he was throwing to ball boys. This year, he's competing. And the difference between a player who believes he controls the outcome and one who has already emotionally outsourced it, you can see it in 3 feet of drop back. Now look at how Cleveland is talking about Shedeur publicly. Not over the top, not manufactured, measured, careful. The kind of measured language you use when you don't want to disrupt the room, but you already know where you're leaning. When Todd Monken says, "My opinion changes by the day," what he's actually saying is, I'm watching for something specific, and one of these men is getting closer to it. Think about it from Shedeur's point of view for a second. You spent your entire rookie year in this league watching, waiting, learning a system, while a veteran ahead of you held the job by title alone. You didn't complain publicly, you didn't force a moment. And now, in the first mandatory session of 2026, you walk onto the field and someone hands you a number. Not any number. 8. And the cameras are right there. What does that feel like? What does that do to your confidence going into 3 days of full contact minicamp reps against this starting secondary? Let me show you how front offices communicate before they're ready to say the thing out loud. Because they always do. Every time. The media wanted Brendan Sorsby. The fan base had an opinion on Brendan Sorsby. And the moment Sorsby was cleared, the narrative machine spun up fast. Supplemental draft speculation, second chance storylines, the whole thing. And Cleveland's response? Todd Monken didn't just pump the brakes, he essentially stopped the car. That's not even crossed my desk. That's the language of a man who has already allocated his quarterback future. You don't speak that definitively about a player you're still genuinely considering. When Todd Monken said, "I like the quarterbacks I have," what he actually meant was, the decision has a shape, and Sorsby doesn't fit inside it. Official jersey assignments happen in private all the time. They don't have to be photographed. They don't have to be pushed out with graphics alongside a defensive standout like Jared Verse. That choice, that pairing, is an organizational signal about who belongs at the center of this franchise's identity going into 2026. And it is not a coincidence that this week, the week the competition becomes real, is the same week Shedeur gets his number, his photo shoot, and his primary coverage moment in the news cycle. That's not scheduling, that's messaging. But to understand why this matters, we have to go back to last year when Shedeur Sanders was on this practice field throwing routes that nobody was watching, building chemistry with receivers in sessions the cameras weren't allowed into, learning a system at game speed without the stage. That patient, invisible work is exactly what you'd want from a franchise quarterback in waiting, and it's the reason this week feels different. This isn't a debut, this is an arrival. 53 men are watching this quarterback competition right now, not all of them neutrally. Veterans who bet their seasons on Deshaun Watson's return to form are watching every Shedeur rep with a specific kind of attention, and young players, the Jared Verses, the next generation of this roster, are gravitating toward the energy that feels most like the future. Locker rooms don't have to hold a vote. They have a read on these things before the coaches announce anything, and right now, the energy is shifting. If the evidence resolves the way I think it will, if Shedeur Sanders walks out of this 3-day minicamp having outperformed Watson against a live starting secondary, this team has a real ceiling. A young, hungry quarterback surrounded by Jared Verse on the edge, a rebuilt secondary, and a coaching staff that has been architecting this transition for a year. That team can win games it has no business winning. That team can surprise people. That team can make Cleveland quiet in a completely different way. 3 years from now, when we look back at this moment, this minicamp, this jersey, this week, it will either be the beginning of something that finally went right in Cleveland, or it will be another footnote in a franchise that keeps finding new ways to get the same answer wrong. The difference between those two outcomes? It starts this Tuesday. We opened with a jersey number 8, handed to Shedeur Sanders on day 1 of mandatory minicamp, not quietly, not privately, but in front of cameras, alongside a defensive cornerstone, with the full visual weight of an organization making a statement. I told you that number wasn't random. Now you see why. Because at the end of all of this, past the depth charts and the press conference quotes and the carefully worded non-answers from a head coach managing a very delicate situation, there is a young man who spent an entire season learning to wait, who showed up to practices nobody covered, who threw routes to receivers who weren't in game shape, who absorbed a system quietly, patiently, without demanding the spotlight. And now, the organization has to decide what they actually believe, not what they say publicly, not what protects them from criticism, what they believe. The number 8 says something. The next 3 days will say the rest. So here's what I want you to sit with. Is Cleveland handing Shedeur the future, a genuine, committed, franchise-altering decision that this city has been waiting decades for? Or are they building up a young quarterback's confidence to use as leverage, keeping Watson honest, keeping the room competitive, with no real intention of making a change until they absolutely have to? One of those is a franchise turning a corner. The other is the Cleveland Browns being the Cleveland Browns. Drop it below. Tell me which one you believe. I'll be reading every single one.